Thank you. I'm especially delighted to be here with Sarah. I assume many of you have read her wonderful book, The Christchurch Fiasco, which tells the sequence of events, the seismic events, and then the subsequent political and economic and insurance issues. And what I want to do is expand on her story a bit and put it in context and then raise some questions. This is not a story that begins on September 4th, 2010, near Christchurch. This is a story that begins in 1994 in Northbrook, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago in America's Midwest, when one of America's largest insurance company retains management consultants to redesign its claims process. And what happens in this suburb of Chicago is relevant to Christchurch because insurance companies increasingly operate globally. The insurance companies you're dealing with here, some of them are indigenous, some of them are German and Swiss and Australian and American. And in a global insurance market, there's economic pressure for all to act in similar ways. What's clear about insurance around the world is that all insurance companies and all regulators of insurance have similar standards for behavior in the processing of claims. You can look, for example, on the Insurance Council of New Zealand website and look at their Fair Insurance Code, which says, among other things, that when you make a claim, we, the insurer, will settle all valid claims quickly and fairly. And the question I want to pose is whether that's occurring in Christchurch. And it's a question that I can't answer, but I pose for you to answer based on the experience in the US and Canada and the UK and elsewhere in the world. This story begins in the 1990s near Chicago when the process is redesigned, and the essential step is to focus on what's the important driver of profitability for an insurance company. And it turns out, the consultants say, not surprisingly, that the important driver is the claims process. What an insurance company pays out in claims is its largest expense and therefore has the most impact on its bottom line. And what they proceed to do across the largest insurers in America is to redesign the claims process so it functions not to pay what the insurance company owes under its policies, no more but no less, but to turn claims into a profit center. And the question for Christchurch and New Zealand is, what's the direction here? As a result of litigation, we have quite detailed records of what these conversations, what these analyses looked like. And the consultants said, for example, we will win the economics game. Winning will be a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game, of course, someone wins, someone loses. The company wins, the policyholder loses. Our change goal is to redefine the game, to question, improve, and radically alter our whole approach to the business of claims. Radically alter the whole approach, and they specified what that meant. Again, quoting, from a suspicion that severities is insurance speak for claims payouts, that severities could not be managed and were a cost of doing business, to an understanding that we can and should manage specific components of severity, should manage how much we pay out in claims, to provide greater financial support to the company. And again, quoting, from a mindset that big dollar claims were most critical, to a learning that our volume of small to mid-sized claims actually offers the greatest opportunity of improvement. One might think that saving money on a $10 million claim is the best way for an insurance company to be profitable, but it's not true. It's much better to save a small amount of money on $100,000 claims because there are so many more of them. And what happened to a number of American insurers, which of course affects the global insurance market, is that the strategy changes and it gets built into the DNA of the claims process in a number of ways. And the phrase that's often used, I entitled my book, delay, deny, defend. Delay payment of claims, deny payment of valid claims in whole or part, and force policyholders to litigation to achieve their benefits under the policy and then aggressively defend that. So let me briefly explain each of those. And again, the question is this what you see in Christchurch? Is this what's acceptable going forward? So delay, think about an insurer's incentives. Insurance companies are investment companies. The difference between an insurance company and a bank or an investment banker is they get the money to invest from premiums. Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world, recently said in his letter to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders that he was delighted to get free money, that is premiums, which he could invest. And when they could turn a profit on the insurance business, it was like having one's cake and eating it too. So part of the reason for delay is to achieve greater investment gains. And anecdotally, this is a process that has increased in the recent recession. It's also the case that by delaying payment, policyholders become tired. Policyholders need their settlements and will either take less than they are entitled to or go away altogether. And there are often strategic reasons for delaying related to policy interpretation and what might be owed ultimately. Denial of claims takes a number of forms. One of the long-term trends is the reduction of coverage available, what we call in the United States privatizing profit and socializing risk. Insurance companies, of course, have to manage risk, but they also have to cover what their policyholders expect. The local manifestation of that, which is controversial and will have to be evaluated going forward, is the sum insured notion. The idea that policies will not provide replacement cost, but they will be limited to a certain amount, and the question is how the shortfall will be made up. Denial also involves the claims process, and what has happened for a number of large insurers is they've set systems in place to make sure that claims are paid for less than their full value, not as a matter of incompetence of claims personnel, not as a matter of a rogue adjuster going off message, but as a result of the system. The systems are hierarchical, they are controlled, people at lower stages are given explicit direction, and at every stage of the claims process there are efforts to reduce the extent to which the insurance companies honor their promises to policyholders. So policyholders are not provided adequate information, or they're provided misinformation, and because insurance is complicated, policyholders typically do not have the expertise and will assume what the insurance company says is correct. The next stage of the claims process in property damage cases is scoping the extent of damage, estimating the extent of loss. This tends to be tightly controlled, use of software, expert systems, and others that often have the effect of underpaying claims. In the United States, we have the expression that what often happens is in catastrophes is the companies, of course, do not have immediately the capacity to send out claims personnel as needed. So they recruit additional personnel. The expression is they find a guy with a laptop and a ladder to go out and figure what the damage is and how much will we need to pay. They will retain experts whose opinions are known to be biased in favor of conclusions that lead to the denial of coverage and so forth. They will create incentive systems for employees. One of the major American insurers, which is a subsidiary of a large insurer that operates here, was found to give by regulators unfair and arbitrary goals, their words, to maintain an average cost claim that was less than the previous years without regard to the merits of the underlying portfolio of claims. So delay payments, deny claims in whole or part, and force policyholders to litigation and then aggressively defend the litigation. Again, the question is, under a system in which insurance companies agree that they need to settle fairly and quickly, are they settling at all? Or is litigation going to become part of the strategy in a nation which tends to be less litigious than we are in the States? Strategy occurs because offers are made to settle claims for less than their full value, and policyholders have no recourse except to litigate. And then when the litigation comes, litigation is managed as extensively as the claims process. It's no longer the case that insurers turn over the litigation to their lawyers and let the lawyers manage the litigation, but it's part of a systematic process supervised at every level and aggressively defended. It's often the case that insurers will over-defend litigation in the sense they'll spend more on the litigation itself than the underlying claim is worth, because what that does is it changes the economics of the litigation process. A lawyer is unable to take a case where the fees essentially will eat up the entire recovery, and therefore in the next case and the next, there will be no litigation because the policyholders won't be able to find lawyers. This is partly because in their earlier studies, the insurers' management consultants found that claims in which policyholders are represented tended to recover 3 to 5 times those in which policyholders are unrepresented. So we have global insurance companies, and in many jurisdictions, we see the same practices over and over again with respect to the claims process: delaying payment, denying payment, forcing litigation. And as I say, the question is, you have to evaluate your experience here, whether that is happening, and to the extent it is, what the remedies are going forward. Again, in the Insurance Council website, they proudly proclaim that this is one of the least regulated insurance markets in the world, and they're right. And the question is whether one of the least regulated insurance markets in the world is appropriate, given the scale not only of the human crisis and the physical crisis, but the financial crisis, which resolution depends to an extent on insurance. The history of insurance in New Zealand actually is very much like the history of insurance in the United States. The oldest existing insurance company in the United States was founded in colonial times, in the late 18th century, by Benjamin Franklin, one of the framers of our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, in Philadelphia. And it was formed by getting householders together to pool their resources, to protect each other against loss. And as part of that process, because the greatest danger was danger by fire, to form a fire brigade, which would protect those who had been insured. As I say, the history is the same here. The New Zealand Insurance Company was the first insurance company in New Zealand, organized in 1859 by a group of merchants and professionals in Auckland. And one of the first things they did was also establish a fire brigade. From the beginning in both of our nations, insurance has been about collective security, joining together to protect each other against the risk of catastrophe. We know today it's harder to join together. In a national or global scale, we need to depend on large profit-making entities to do that. And the ultimate question is whether the purpose remains the same, whether insurance through large insurance companies becomes a vehicle for collective security or is focused instead on corporate profits. Thank you.